Awesome. What's up, everyone? Today we're going to be talking about introverted sensing, also known as SI. So this is the dominant function of the ISFJ and the ISTJ, the auxiliary slash second function of the ESFJ and ESTJ, the tertiary function of the INFP, INTP, and the inferior function of the ENFP and the ENTP, which Heidi happens to be an ENFP. So we're going to be asking her insights or how she deals with SI. But before we jump everything off, I guess we'll just start off like usual with the short description of what I've said about introverted sensing, SI, and see how that matches up with what Heidi pretty much believes. So I said that SI is concerned with details, what is tried and true and reliable. This function stores details of concrete experiences or facts to reference and potentially replicate and/or even relive later on in the future. A person who uses this function allows their own and/or others' experiences to bring light to their own identity. SI provides the individual the ability to be in tune with their own internal physical state, such as fluctuation of health. Sometimes SI users can seem rigid and nitpicky. So, pretty much in essence, SI, the nickname that Personality Hacker gave it was memory, and it's not necessarily because SI users will have a great memory, but it's more because they go so heavily off of their impressions. SI users love, like what I said, what is tried and true. They love to go off of their experiences. They're really people who have a sort of wisdom from their past. They've learned from their past and what's reliable from their past, and then they use that to kind of identify whether or not maybe a decision may be good or bad, depending on how their experience with that was before and what type of impressions that experience may have had on them.
Yeah, you said that you used the word impressions to describe SI at some point in there, and that's actually the main word I associate with SI. I feel personally, even though it's my inferior function, I feel very, very connected to SI because I think your inferior does have a really strong presence in your life, and also I grew up in a family predominantly SI dominant or auxiliary types, so SI has just played a very big part in how I was raised. So I have a very kind of strong reverence for SI. I think it's a function that's very misunderstood because I think most SI users misidentify themselves as NI users. So we don't delve deeply into what SI is, but I actually think SI is a very, I would almost say mystical function, which is a word that we give to NI, but I think it really applies to SI. I think SI, the way I kind of conceive of it and perceive it is it's almost there's a deepening of an experience once SI takes hold of it. So SI is really a system of impressions as far as I see and understand it. So it's kind of taking your experiences of the world and rooting through them, and certain ones will begin to pop out as more meaningful, more memorable, and there is an element of mysticism to it because I think the SI user isn't always even sure why those things are suddenly becoming so prominent for them. And usually it's a couple of things. Usually it's it's something they've done, so they've attached positive memories to this experience, or they've seen it repeated over and over and over again, so it starts kind of becoming bigger and more prominent in their minds. But something suddenly makes you feel a very personal and strong attachment and trust of either a person or a product or a situation that you want to put yourselves in. And that's what SI really is that anchoring effect, that feeling of okay, this thing matters, this thing is meaningful, this thing is trustworthy, and this thing has value. SI is really a value judgment function, in my opinion. Even though we don't usually look at perceptive functions that way, I think SI really is about figuring out what is meaningful, what can be trusted, and what is worth valuing. I think that's kind of how I see it, and it's a very reflective function, very, very, very reflective. So SI is all about going over your past experiences, thinking about what's happened, what's worked for you, what hasn't, and figuring out, okay, what felt meaningful, what mattered, what should I bring into the future, what should I repeat in the future based on what has made my life meaningful and deep and important in the past. And that applies to people, it applies to like jobs, it applies to everything down to like, I've seen strong SI users not want to part with like certain home decor items because they had those during a part of their life that was important to them. And I feel that way as an SI user. Like I get very, very attached to things that have positive memories attached to them. And I've been that way ever since I was a kid. Like I was like, my parents always gave me so much crap for being a pack rat because anytime like something had a memory attached to it, I couldn't let go of it. Like I had this very, very strong sentimental streak, and I still do. I 100% am still this way as an adult. And I think anyone who has SI really has that. It's like a very, very strong sentimental component to their personality. I think NI or NE and SI have to work together to be healthy in either form. And I don't think it's necessarily that NE is totally scattered if it doesn't have SI. Like I think that's kind of how NE looks from the outside, but in reality, there's always an order to NE. Like NE is always looking forward in a fashion that isn't random, even if it's not employing SI. But I do think that once you have SI paired with NE, you're going to be able to incorporate a lot more of like what has worked for you, what hasn't worked for you. Therefore, you're going to be able to make more informed choices about the future. Whereas when NE isn't integrated with SI in any way, it's kind of going to be almost too optimistic. Like it's always going to be looking at like, okay, well, like maybe this thing is going to work out. There's still an order to it. It's not bouncing around from thing to thing based on what catches its eye, which is kind of a common misperception about NE. It's still looking for things that it thinks are going to be important and meaningful, but it lacks the ability to go, okay, this was not important and meaningful the last time I tried it. It lacks the ability to go, okay, here's something that has worked out really well for me that I wouldn't intuitively assume would work out really well for me, but the last time I did it, it did, so maybe I should do more of that. So that's a lot of what SI is. It's that anchoring effect for NE. And I think that it also really functions to just kind of help us find a sense of meaning in our life, which is actually something that like an INTP friend said to me once when I was asking him how SI worked for him. And he said, well, SI is the function that gives my life meaning. And I was like, really? You don't think like NE is what you attribute to like your search for meaning? And he's like, no, NE is what I attribute to like my explorative nature and my need to like go, have novelty and try out different situations and come up with creative plans for the future. But he said what kind of feels like home and gives me that sense of something matters in my life is my SI. And I thought about it a lot. And I was like, you know what? Me too. But I never realized that before. SI is kind of that function that you return home to. Like it's when you're any sort of, so NP or SJ will kind of have this sense of like familiarity surrounding certain people, certain places, certain things, certain memories. And it just like anchors you in the world, and it kind of makes you feel like, okay, there has been something that mattered that I can return to. And if you're using it in a healthy way, you can use that understanding of what is meaningful to you to structure your life so that more things can become meaningful, because now you're able to understand like this works for me in this way and this works for me in this way. So if I'm kind of gathering all these things that are giving me meaning, eventually you're going to be able to compile those into like a very meaningful existence.
They have like a stereotype or like I can't really think of the word, but they're known for like liking routine a lot.
Yeah.
And from what I've seen, I think that they usually like routine so much because like we just stated, like they get comfortable, and then once they get into that routine and it works for them, then they pretty much perfect that routine. And I think that's where their perfectionist type of habits could like come from, because it's like I've done this so many times. I know this thing like inside out like so well that I don't want to move from something else because I'm like perfect at this. Like I do this, like I've mastered this pretty well. And I think that that's something that a lot of SI users like have. Like if SE users are the ones who can like just pick something up like really, really quickly, SI users are the ones, in my opinion, who like once they like try something, they might be afraid initially to try it, but then once they start and then they keep on doing it, the more they do it, like probably more than any other type, like they will get the hang of it so well that they will become like perfect at it, like spotless, especially with like how detailed they are. And then when they get there, then they can actually start incorporating, like, if they have like a good handle on their NE, they can start like incorporating like little like flares to it and everything to make it like a little bit more flashy for whatever reason.
A lot of times, like what is really brilliant about SI is that it's able to recognize those patterns really well. So like the way I described SI in a podcast that I did once is like, if life is like, let's say life is like a river and there's all these stones on the river, and some of the stones are really like stable and you can step on them to get to the other side, and then some of them are really like shaky and you might fall off of them. And SI is like watching everyone cross the river, and it's watching like which stones people are falling off of and which ones are like consistently across all of the people crossing the river reliable. And it's forming a pathway in its mind of what the safe route across the river is. So like,
yeah,
an SI user is going to be able to tell you, here's exactly which stones you can step on, and you can rely on those stones to be reliable and to get you across the river. And that's like kind of how they do everything. Like SI is kind of, in my mind, always just like watching and storing information about what's working and what's not, and then applying that information in the future in order to proceed forward as reliably as possible.
And I feel like this, especially when it comes to STJs, it works very well because they pair that SI with their TE. So then it's not only like looking at the stones to see like, like, okay, which ones have already like worked, but their TE naturally already has that type of what will work type of mentality. So with STJs, they usually are the ones that are able to look at what people have tried in the past and has like successfully worked time and time again. And then they're like, okay, well then let's do it this way because it's worked for this person and that person and that person and that person. So it's probably going to work for us too. And as opposed to like maybe like, the NTJ is like, well, let me try something like different. They get a hard time for that, like detailed and like, like tried and true type of method. But oftentimes like that's something that's really good because that it could be something that's reliable, or it will be something that's reliable majority of the time because they have literally like looked at, just I love that analogy or that metaphor that you gave. Like they have watched other people cross that stream and have seen like, okay, consistently this stone is like held up. So if I'm telling you to step on this stone, it's going to work. And just because like, like everybody else has done it, I feel like we live in like an era where like people are like, oh, well, since everybody else has done it, then we don't really want to do it anymore. But oftentimes like that's like, no, because everyone else has done it, that's probably why we should continue to do it, because we know that this is going to work. And there's times, for each like, kind of like mindset where it's like, okay, no, now it's time to try something new and innovate in this way. But that doesn't mean that we should totally like toss the tried and true method of things. And if we did always do that, then we would not really have like consistency. So one time we talked about the SJs and we talked about like how like they're the ones who literally like keep everything in our society pretty much like solid and like grounded and moving through. SJs make up like majority of the population, and I'm honestly like thankful for that because I feel like things would just be like I likened it one time to how like if Apple had always like had updates for their phone, like literally like so far they have a new iOS come out like yearly and everybody has to get used to it or something. But if they had a new iOS come out like every like 3 weeks, I feel like that could be likened to a world without SI users because we won't have anyone to like really like keep things like consistent and moderate. So SI is a very important function, and I just think that it doesn't get enough credit in the MBTI community, but there's a lot to it that people overlook.
Thank you guys for all of your comments, all your interactions.
But leave your comments. We'll definitely be responding throughout the week.
Ciao.
See you.
I'm David Bowder, CEO of SPASIGMA. Every day, each of us is surrounded by a great diversity of people, and indeed, personalities. Some people we find it very easy to relate to. Others, not so much so. Our program exists to help you make sense of your own personality, as well as the diverse personalities around you, to help you improve both your personal and professional lives. Shakespeare said, "To thine own self be true." We'll teach you to understand how to reach the diverse personalities around you, to communicate with them in a way that integrates who you are with who they are. So enough talk about all this. Welcome to SPASIGMA's Personality Quotient PQ program. Enjoy the journey.